Hi guys, so one of the most common topics I get asked is by people who aren't necessarily close to a HEMA club, HEMA being Historical European Martial Arts, otherwise known as Historical Fencing, or sometimes WMA, Western Martial Arts also. From people who aren't necessarily near to a club, who want to get into the activity. And they kind of ask if I could do a video describing, possible avenues for getting into HEMA if you don't live near a club. Well, the first thing to say is, if you're even remotely able to get to a club, what I would suggest is, even if you can't get to it on a weekly basis, it's really worth trying to get there sometimes, okay? Even if it's once a month, or even if it's a couple of times a year, or even just once a year, okay? Getting to a HEMA club will be a valuable experience for you. You will learn a lot more in face-to-face teaching than you will be able to learning through books, DVDs and the internet, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that another possibility, especially for people living in the States or maybe Australia, big countries where you have to travel a long way to get anywhere, is events, okay? Now, there are now many HEMA events, be it in Europe, we've got my own event, Fight Camp, there's a Drain event in Austria, there's Dijon event, there's Swordfish in Gothenburg, there's events in Poland, there's events in Spain, there's events in Italy, there's events all over Europe, okay? So for Europeans it's fairly easy, we can travel fairly easily and fairly cheaply, okay? So if you're not particularly close to a club, really try to get to an event, because most of the HEMA events are actually not really catered towards the kind of upper experience levels of HEMA people. Actually, most classes at most HEMA events are pretty much catered to the beginner. So if you've kind of got a, which end of a sword to hold, or which end of any other weapon to hold, and you've watched some YouTube videos and maybe read a couple of books, you will be experienced enough to attend a HEMA event. And the great thing about HEMA events, or historical fencing events, is you get to meet a lot of different teachers who teach in very different styles. They teach different weapons, different periods, and of course they are from different places in the world. So different ways of doing things, and sometimes different mother tongues as well. So, and of course you've got to remember, sometimes German or Italian or other nationality teachers maybe are working with sources in their own language that maybe us Brits and Americans and such like don't do. We have to translate things before we can understand them. So really trying to get to HEMA events is really high on the recommendation list if you can't get to a class, at least regularly or semi-regularly. The other great thing about getting to HEMA events is that, of course, if you're not exactly sure which branch of historical European martial arts you want to go into, there you have it, you have a cross-section of loads of different things. Maybe there's wrestling and pugilism and dagger and different types of sword from different periods, maybe sword and buckler, rapier, backsword, longsword, mesa, dusak, sabre, whatever. So you can experience lots of different things in, usually 1, 2 or 3 days. Most events are spread over, and you can get a better sense of what it is you want to focus on. And in some cases, maybe you've been focusing on longsword, say, and you go along to a HEMA event, and maybe by the end of it you'll find actually what you want to do is rapier or sword and buckler. So these events are fantastic for learning how different people teach, of course learning what those people have to teach, and experiencing lots of different aspects of the art. And they're usually great fun as well, and you'll get to, maybe if you're experienced enough, do some sparring, or maybe watch a tournament, take part in the tournament, and also just talk to lots of people. And a lot of the best learning that's done at HEMA events is actually just done sitting around, or maybe having dinner, chatting with people who are usually really passionate about their particular topic and can tell you lots of things that you maybe wouldn't get in a more formal class. So get to a HEMA event if you possibly can. If that's not possible, maybe you're too young, or maybe you can't afford it, or you have other commitments, family commitments or such like, that mean that it's not really practical at the moment, but you do want to get started, or maybe the event that you want to go to is in 6 months' time or a year's time, and you want to do something up until then. What next? Well, the internet has a huge number of resources now. It's full of obviously my videos, but there are lots of other people out there doing similar-ish videos to mine. Some of them are more instructional, showing actual techniques with sword or other weapons, and you know, I'll put some links down in the comments underneath this video to other YouTube channels where you can get instructional material. But equally, apart from the kind of YouTube side of things and the kind of what's available for free, for example on the HEMA Alliance forum, on the Scholar forum, the HEMA Alliance also has a fairly useful Facebook page. There's HEMAC website has a number of resources on it. And there's some useful stuff on the HEMAC Facebook page as well, and indeed my own Scholar Gladiatoria Facebook page, some interesting things get posted on there. But in terms of actually learning, often what you'll find is that if you don't have an instructor or someone more experienced who can actually teach you, then actually working from one of the good HEMA sort of beginners books that are available will be a route that you want to go down. And of course there are DVDs as well, and if you go to I'll just name two examples. If you go to Freelance Academy Press website, or if you go to the Wyvern Media website, the former being US, the latter being UK, both of those have a range of books and DVDs available through them, and indeed you can find some of those available through the HEMA shop or the Night shop books and DVDs section as well. And you'll find that there are DVDs for training German longsword, sword and buckler. There are books available for a wide variety of stuff, from sword and buckler through to you know, Fiore di Liberi, Italian longsword and dagger and wrestling, through to Lichtenauer, German longsword, and the related Ott the Jews, German wrestling, medieval wrestling system as well. So there's a massive variety of DVDs and books available now, from people like Christian Tobler and Guy Windsor, and various other people out there. So there are lots of resources for you to draw upon, for you to learn at home by yourself. But I would always reiterate that if you can get to train with people who are training in a club or at an event, then that is kind of, you will learn quicker that way, I would say. And especially if you've got a foundation there that you've learned through the online resources or books and DVDs, or a mixture of both. Okay, so do try and get face-to-face teaching if you can. Then in terms of how do you progress from there, I would say the next stage is you really want to be looking at setting up, if not a typical class as you might think of it, a study group. And this is how many of the HEMA clubs actually started. My own club more or less started like this. So my HEMA career started when I'd done fencing and kung fu and a little bit of reenactment beforehand, but I always knew that what I wanted to be learning was how to use historical, particularly medieval European weapons. And I was lucky enough to be around in the right place at the right time. And I was reading a martial arts magazine. I was doing kung fu at the time, and there was an article in there about a gentleman called Terry Brown, who runs the Company of Masters just north of, in the north part of London. And he was at the time pretty much in the UK, if not the pioneer, but one of the very few, maybe probably one of two or three people in the UK who was teaching historical European martial arts, or as most people called it then, Western martial arts, WMA. And I was lucky enough to be, I think I was about 19 or 20, and yeah, thinking about it, yeah, I was 20 I was actually thinking about it. And I went along and I studied with him. I was a student of his for a couple of years. I was a very regular student. It was fantastic. I learnt a lot. Ultimately I wanted to study medieval period sources, and after a couple of years training under Terry, I kind of, by that time I'd accumulated knowledge of lots of other, you know, sources, or the existence of other sources, and I kind of knew what I wanted to study. And I went off with Rob Lovett from the Exiles, and together we built up the Exiles and started studying Fiore di Liberi's system. And I got really into the sort of medieval Italian stuff, and that's what I focused on for a number of years. And I still teach on a regular basis. So I was very lucky in being in the right place at the right time. However, my actual club, Scholar Gladiatoria, essentially grew out of me getting a group of friends together and teaching them what I was learning from other places. So in a sense, it was, although I was sort of the leader of it, and I ended up being the teacher of it, initially I just got some interested friends together and started sharing with them what I was learning. So I was the kind of the channel by which they were getting the material as well. And eventually that grew up into the club that we have today with, you know, 50 regular members, and that's just in London, and then probably another 20 in Manchester and another 20 in Bradford or thereabouts. So you know, it grew into a big club, essentially from a study group, really from a handful of people who had a common interest. And it only takes one really passionate individual to get that going. So if you're that person, if you're out there thinking, I really want to do this, really you only actually need to get a club going to begin with. You only really need your passion, and if possible someone else who will listen to you and you can practice with. It is important to try and move beyond solo training. You can learn a lot by yourself, but you really, to get a feel for how the body mechanics of combat works, you need another person to run through techniques with, and to understand, to really understand what works and what doesn't, and why certain things work the way they do. So just finding one other person out there, it could be your best friend from when you were a young age, or it could just be someone you meet on the internet who's not that far away from you and you can meet up at, you know, halfway, or it could be someone from your you know, from your school maybe. Ask around, find out if anybody around has got a similar interest to you. It could even be someone you meet at a similar or kind of related sports club you go to. For example, if you start doing some sport fencing as kind of extra training for a basis in HEMA, or if you start doing some other martial art, or you've done a martial art in the past, very often people who do modern sport fencing, or people who do Asian martial arts, will have an interest in maybe exploring historical European martial arts, so maybe think about going down that avenue. And it could even be, you know, if you really can't find anyone else to train with at all, it could be that you do start doing some sport fencing, or maybe kendo or kenjutsu or aikido or jiu-jitsu or judo, whatever it is that has transferable skills. And it might be that you meet, you know, people through doing that activity who have an interest in going forward with HEMA as well. I'm not suggesting stealing students from someone else's class, of course, but you know, it's very often that people have overlapping interests. So there we go. I hope that gives a few ideas, and it does connect also. A lot of the time people ask me, oh, I can't find any HEMA, should I do sport fencing, should I do kendo? Those things are not going to be of any harm, okay? There are some things you might have to unlearn further along the line, but if you can do related activities, and I did sport fencing, and I did a little bit of kendo, and I did kung fu, and I did a bit of reenactment. I did things that did prove to be in various different ways useful to me later on in my sort of HEMA life. So yeah, those things are never wasted. You can always draw things from them. So yeah, I hope that's useful to some of you, and feel free in the comments under this video to ask questions. The final thing I should mention as well, which I forgot to mention, is that if you're looking for clubs, there are various online resources now for finding HEMA or historical fencing clubs, and I will post links to those below. Okay, thank you.